My night, I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville. You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit. You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short-end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it.
The words spoken by Marlon Brando in this scene are some of the most famous in film history, and they also show the torment that his character is going through throughout the course of the film. On the Waterfront is a very interesting film. On the surface, it's about Terry Malloy, played by Marlon Brando, and his decision to testify against corrupt union members at his waterfront that he works. But in reality, director Elia Kazan made On the Waterfront to justify his decision on his testimony against former known communist members in the American Communist Party, which got him a lot of negative publicity. He tries to use On the Waterfront to justify his decision by telling his story through the eyes of Terry Malloy, and in doing so, he tells a very riveting story. Now, there's been a lot of debate over whether or not On the Waterfront was indeed Elia Kazan's justification on his testimony, or whether or not it was simply a coincidence that it sprung up at the time of his testimony. I think it was Kazan trying to show the American audience what he was feeling at the time, and that mainly comes in mind from the end of the film, when Brando's character is talking to some union members and talking about why he testified against them. And it sort of draws a mirror image to what I would imagine Kazan would have been feeling at the time. But with all social and political aspects aside, I feel it'd be best to just analyze this film as its own piece without thinking about Kazan at all, because on its own, this film is still very good, even if you had no idea about what Kazan was doing. The hero of On the Waterfront is Terry Malloy, who once again is played by Marlon Brando. Malloy was an up-and-coming prize fighter until he had to blow a fight to allow one of the union members that he worked for to win a bet. And after that, his fighting career was basically over, and he became a pretty pathetic and pitiful dock worker. You know, he went from being this big hotshot to just being, one of the dozens and possibly even hundreds working on the waterfront. And this shows, and he has this internal feeling that his life is now, gone to crap, which it has. And you can tell throughout the film that he reminisces about the good old days and wishes that he could go back in time and still be on top. And it shows that even back then, his union had a big amount of control over him and possibly ruined his life. The corrupt union also has control over Terry's life when they have Terry coax a fellow dock worker to go onto the roof of his apartment, where some union people beat him up and toss him off of the roof and kill him because they believed he was about to testify against them. And the killing of this man sort of opens the eyes of the people working at the dock, because they see, wait, these guys aren't kidding. And then also, it also causes a preacher to go to the dock, and he gathers a meeting of people, and he decides to start fighting against the corrupt union, and he's trying to have people testify, but they play deaf and dumb, or D&D, which basically means that they don't know anything. If the cops ask them, they don't know anything about what's going on, so it makes the union almost untouchable. But the sister of the person who was pushed off the roof kind of forms a relationship with Terry, and she tries to talk him into testifying, because really, if he testifies, then he can give the cops everything they know. And at first, Terry's wanting to play D&D like the rest of the longshoremen, but throughout the course of the film, he sort of comes to grips with reality, and he decides that he's not going to let this corrupt union of pretty much gangsters control his life anymore, and he ends up testifying in the end. And that's pretty much the whole plot of the film. And if you think it feels sort of loose or weak, I guess you could say, it sort of is. It's not, it's not Amadeus, it's not rich with plot. But what's so great about this film is what's inside, what's in between the major points of the plot. And that exists in the relationship between Brando's character and the love interest, who I'm blanking on her name now. But, they, as you can see on the screen here, they form a pretty strong bond, and the writing's very good between the two. And it's sort of a cliche, Brando caused her brother to be killed, and he knows, but she doesn't, and they have to, sort of work their relationship to, and get closer together before Brando is able to tell her, and, he does, and she's mad for a little while, but, cliched stuff. But it's still very good, and probably the best part about this movie overall would be Brando's acting. He gives a very, very impressive performance here. Not quite up to par with, let's say, Vito Corleone or Stanley Kowalski. I wouldn't say he's about that good, but it's probably his third best performance here. And like his scene in the beginning of the review here that I showed shows how well he does in this film, and it's very strong. And another thing though is that it's not just Brando. Every single performance in this film is strong. And like I said, while the story itself is not that rich, it's how he gets there. It's all the events that makes Brando see that he's not going to just, be the little guy. He's not going to be stomped into the ground anymore by this union. And all the events that makes him come to terms with that is what really makes this film great. When I think about it, I really don't have any complaints about On the Waterfront. I mean, I talked about how Brando is responsible for his love interest's brother's death. And while that's not great, and you can kind of tell from a mile away how that's going to work in the story. So if I spoiled it for you, I'm sorry, but you can kind of see it coming. But it's done fairly well because they don't mope around about it for a long time. It happens, and then, 10 minutes later, they're past it. And the way they get past it is also very good. And like I said, I know I said the story is weak, but it's not as much about the story as much as Brando's journey and the journey that his character makes, and the changes he goes through, and the experiences he has, and just all the life lessons he learns, and everything that he absorbs from his environment and the events around him. And in a way, I think you can go back and relate it to Elia Kazan and what happened with him. And obviously, I'm not a Kazan scholar, and I'm sorry if I got details of that backstory wrong, so if there are any Elia Kazan super fans, I'm sorry. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that guy's name right. I'm pretty sure he pronounced it another way, but whatever. And speaking of Kazan, the directing's also very good, and while I know black and white was probably common back in 1954, which was the year this movie was made, I think that they were very smart to use black and white and not color, because like in Raging Bull, the black and white sort of helps you to get into the grit and the kind of awfulness of the environment. And I also think it indirectly shows how bland Brando's life has become and how unimportant it is. And it would have been really cool, and actually this may have been cliched, but it would have been interesting if Kazan decided to make the film color towards the end. Because there's a very powerful scene when Brando's character is standing on the docks talking to his union members about, or not members, his union about why he testified against them. And like I said, I think it's almost probably a direct reflection on what Kazan was feeling. And it's very powerful. And I think that if they decided to use color there, I don't know if that would have been good actually, but it would have been an interesting directive choice. While we're talking about the final scene in the movie when he's talking to his union, I think that's the best scene in the film. Although I played the I could have been a contender scene in the review for you earlier. I feel like while that one's well known, the dock scene, while I think I've seen it before, I didn't remember it specifically, and it's one of the most powerful scenes in film history that I've ever seen. And I'm not going to spoil what happens, but it's very, very good. And that causes On the Waterfront to have one of the best endings of any film I've ever seen. Although I probably got a little mixed up when I was trying to explain how you can relate Elia Kazan's personal life to the plot of On the Waterfront. I know I'm not, like I said, I'm not a Kazan scholar, so I'm sorry if I sounded a little, I guess, unconfident. But I hope that didn't hide how much I actually love this film. It's one of my favorites. It's not top 10. It's around top 20 or so. And I got a feeling I'll like it the more every time I watch it, even if you don't think about Kazan. Because I wasn't thinking about Kazan's personal life while watching the film. But even without it, I think it's a great character study. And even though the story is not very strong, it's still, like I said, it's about the journey. And the journey is so good that I can't give this film anything but a 10 out of 10. And it's also the first film I reviewed that earns the Vindy Seal of Approval. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! I'm out of my house!